այստեղ։ Խնդրում եմ, եթե կա կամ գրեք կամ բարձրախոսով ասեք, տեղափոխվենք հայկական հատված։
Ես քեզ լսում եմ հայերենով Աննա ջան, բայց տեղափոխվել եմ հայկական հատված։
Դուք հիմա Տիկին Գոհար, թարգմանչին չեք լսում, Շուշանին չեք լսում։
Չէ, չեմ լսում։
Ուրեմն չեք տեղափոխվել հայկական հատված, որտեղ մենք անգլերենում ենք հիմա խոսում։ Համակարգչով եք միացել։
Չէ, հեռախոսով եմ Աննա ջան։
Հեռախոսով եք, այդտեղ պետքա փորձեք գտնել գլոբուսի նշան։
Գտել եմ Աննա, դրանք լրիվ գտել եմ։
Ու սեղմում եք հայկական channel եւ չեք լսում։
Սեղմել եմ հայկական, հետո ուրիշ բան էլ ունենք սեղմելու, հայկականի վրա փիչկա է դնում, ուրիշ տեղ էլ ունենք սեղմելու։
Ներքևում գրված է mute original audio։ Ուզեք
Այո։
մեկ։
Ահա, դա էլ արեցի։
Հիմա ինձ էլի լսում եք։
Էլի լսում եմ։
Մենք երկուս հայերեն channel-ը լսում ենք հիմնական Շուշանին, երբ Շուշանը խոսում է, երբ Շուշանը չի խոսում, then Աննայի ձայնը բարձրանում։
Հա, այդ դեպքում ուրեմն նորմալ է իմ մոտ։
Հա, շատ լավ։
Mute original audio։
Մերսի շատ։
Քանի որ մասնակիցները դեռ գալիս են, եւս 5 րոպե կսպասենք, մինչև 5:10 ու կսկսենք արդեն պրեզենտացիան։ Որից հետո ուզում եմ տեղյակ պահել նաև, որ ամբողջ դասընթացը ձայնագրվելու է եւ տեղադրելու ենք մեր YouTube-յան ալիքում, ինչպես նաև կփոխանցենք ձեզ էլեկտրոնային հասցեով պրեզենտացիան ու ձայնագրությունը հետագայում լսելու կամ փոխանցելու այլ ֆերմերներին, այլ մարդկանց։ Այն մասնակիցները, ովքեր որ արդեն միացել են, մինչև սպասել եմ մյուս մասնակիցներին, խնդրում ենք լրացնել գրանցման թերթիկը, որպեսզի ձեր էլեկտրոնային հասցեն ու կոնտակտներ ունենանք հետագայի համար։ Գրանցման թերթիկը նամակների մեջ արդեն տեղադրված է, խնդրում ենք լրացրել, մինչև սպասենք մյուսներին։
Այո, Շուշան ջան, ասում։ Շատ լավ, ես ուրեմն անգլերեն channel-ում դա իրեն փոխանցել։ Շատ լավ։ Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
Do you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I do.
Our interpretation specialist asked you to switch to the English channel.
Yeah, I am on that now.
Okay, because she doesn't hear you. Can you?
I can hear you.
Okay.
But I'm going to turn it off during my presentation, correct? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Նորից եմ ուզում խնդրել լրացնեք գրանցման թերթիկը, դեռ ունենք մասնակիցներ, ովքեր որ միացած են ու չեն գրանցվել, եւ եւս մեկ րոպե սպասենք ու արդեն կսկսենք մեր պրեզենտացիան։ Սկսենք արդեն Dr. Wolf, are
Yes.
you ready? Can we start?
Want me to start?
Okay, let me to present and introduce first who we are, then I will send talk to you, then you will start the presentation.
Okay.
Ցանկանում եմ ողջունել բոլորիդ, շնորհակալ ենք, որ միացել եք հանդիպմանը։ Եվ ձեր թույլտվությամբ սկսել արդեն պրեզենտացիան։ Այսօրվա թեման շատ ներողություն եմ։ Let me to change my language channel, then I can start because I cannot hear Shushan Jankaneres. Yeah, in just a second.
Anna ջան, դու պետք է ոնց որ թե գնաս հայկական channel-ում խոսես, գիտես?
Yes, ուզում եմ գալ հայկական։
Interpretation-ը որ
Yeah.
մեջ չկա։
Just a second. I need to stop sharing, then go to our main channel. Ներողություն եմ խնդրում տեխնիկական մասի համար, կարիք ունեի գալ հայկական հարթակ, որ կարողանայի խոսել։ Ուզում եմ ներկայացնել արդեն այսօրվա թեման, ինչի մասին ենք քննարկելու։ Խոսելու ենք հողի կենսաբանության եւ հողի առողջության կառավարման սահմանների վերաբերյալ։ Այսօրվա հանդիպումը կազմակերպված է iCare հիմնադրամի, Humphrey Fellowship-ի եւ Vista ծրագրի հետ համատեղ։ Դասընթացը թեման քննարկումը կազմակերպված է ներողություն։ Այսօրվա ընդհանուր տևողությունը հանդիպման լինելու է շուրջ 2 ժամ։ Խոսալու ենք, ունենալու ենք քննարկում Կորնելի համալսարանի պրոֆեսորի համակարգմամբ, Dr. David T. կողմից, իսկ ուզում եմ ներկայացնել նաև ձեզ Արտակին Խաչատրյան, ով որ Կորնելի համալսարանում հետազոտություն ուսանել է եւ հետազոտություն է իրականացրել այս թեմաների շրջանակում, ինչի արդյունքում էլ ունենք այսօրվա հանդիպում քննարկումը։ Եվ հանդիպման վերջում ունենալու ենք նաև փոքրիկ կարճ հարցում օրվա ամփոփման դասընթացի հարցերի վերաբերյալ եւ կունենանք հարց ու պատասխանի շրջանակ։ Հիմա խոսքը փոխանցեմ Արտակին եւ հետո արդեն կխնդրենք Dr. David Wolf-ը ներկայացնի թեման ընդհանուր ավելի մանրամասն։
Շնորհակալություն Աննա ջան, ներկայացման համար ուզում եմ ողջունել բոլոր մասնակիցներին։ Շատ ուրախ եմ, որ ժամանակ եք գտել եւ միացել եք այսօրվա մեր կազմակերպվելիք հանդիպմանը։ Ես կուզենայի մի քանի խոսքով ներկայացնել Dr. David Wolf-ին, ով Կորնելի համալսարանում դասավանդում է հողի առողջության եւ կլիմայի փոփոխության թեմայով տարբեր դասընթացներ։ Ես Կորնելում ուսուցանելու ընթացքում հնարավորություն եմ ունեցել մասնակցելու իրեն դասընթացներին եւ պրեզենտացիաներին, որի ընթացքում շատ բան եմ լսել նոր եւ հետաքրքիր, հիմնականում ինձ հետաքրքրեց իրեն դասընթացը հողի միկրոբիոլոգիա եւ նրա կարևորությունը հողագործության եւ բույսերի աճի եւ նրանց կապը կլիմայի փոփոխության հետ, որը իրեն խնդրեցի, որ ինքը այսօր ժամանակ գտնի եւ մեզ ներկայացնի։ Դոկտոր Դեվիդ Վոլֆը մի քանի գրքերի հեղինակ է, որոնք շատ մեծ լայն տարածում ունեն աշխարհով մեկ եւ ԱՄՆ-ում, եւ հույսով եմ, որ շատ հետաքրքիր հանդիպում է մեզ սպասվում, ակնկալում եմ ձեր կողմից հարցեր եւ ակտիվ մասնակցություն։ Շնորհակալություն։ Աննա։
Շատ լավ, հիմա խնդրենք արդեն Dr. David Wolf-ին ներկայացնել խոսքը փոխանցենք իրեն ու խնդրենք սկսի արդեն պրեզենտացիան։
Okay, I'll share my screen. And it will take me just a moment. Patience for a moment while I find my slides. I have a lot of talks I give here. You can see all my PowerPoints while I find the one. Okay. Okay, so can everybody see this okay? And can you hear
Yes,
me?
we
I
see
hope?
that. Yes, we
Okay.
see that.
Okay, so yeah, so the topic today is soil biology, and just wanted to say that this is not just a very important and really exciting area of research in agriculture, but actually in all of biology. I mean, it's really a key topic they're now beginning to cover more in general biology classes because we are discovering so many new things about the life beneath our feet, the abundance and the diversity. And of course, all of this has a lot of implications, particularly for agriculture and land management. And so I'll be talking about some of these things in my slides. This has my email up there in case anybody wants to contact me separate from the meeting. Okay, so before I get into talking about some of the things that the many thousands of scientists today are doing in terms of studying this life beneath our feet, I wanted to recognize a couple of the very earliest pioneers who were studying life below ground. And one of the first and one of the most famous is the famous scientist Charles Darwin because of his work in evolution. But many are surprised to learn that for more than 40 years, he was studying the habits of earthworms and their activity. At the time, back in the 1800s, earthworms were considered mostly perhaps bad for plants and eating their roots or something like that. And what he discovered is how important they were in decomposing crop residue, leaves that fall off trees in the wintertime, and decomposing those and bringing all of those into the soil food web so that we have recycling of nutrients, et cetera. And they move tremendous amounts of soil and crop residue every year. And he wrote an entire book about it. In fact, if you look at my picture for a moment, I actually have somebody knowing about my interest in soil biology, gave me a copy, a second edition of this Charles Darwin book. Look how thick it is. A very thick book, well over close to 200 pages, all about earthworms that he published late in his life. So certainly, just like so many things, Charles Darwin was there before us, already knew a lot about what was going on, and amazing scientist. The second and the last of the older scientists I will mention is a scientist from the United States who was working in the early 1900s at Rutgers University. His name was Salman Waxman. He grew up on a farm, and he noticed that on the farm, it was amazing how they could take diseased and dead plants, even dead livestock, and they could put them into the soil, and the soil had some kind of purification properties. The soil did not stay, these diseases did not last long in the soil from diseased plants that they put in, if the farmers would turn into the soil, etc. So he was convinced that the soil contained, he came up with the term antibiotic. It's a very phrase that's used all the time now for medicines we use to cure disease. And in fact, he was convinced there would be antibiotics in the soil that could be good for human disease. And he began searching the soil, years and years of detailed work, looking for antibiotics in the soil. At the time he was doing his work, the only antibiotic we had for disease was penicillin. But he discovered the second antibiotic, streptomycin, which helped cure tuberculosis and many important human diseases. So it's interesting, one of our first pioneer soil biologists actually won the Pulitzer Prize for medicine because of this work. Well, today we have, as I said, many thousands of people studying soils and soil biology, and it's truly is a revolution going on. And for me, it's been very exciting working in this area because, of course, I'm a scientist, but I work with farmers, and I see this as an area where the important discovery we're doing at the university is really falling in line with the needs of farmers, and also thinking about things like protecting our environment, climate change. All of this comes together in this part of what I do. So one thing is we've learned with new genetic techniques where we can take a soil sample and we can analyze the genetic material in the soil. We've learned that with our old-fashioned techniques of trying to bring soil back to the lab and grow the bacteria and the different organisms that live in the soil, we had very little luck. We were missing probably 95% of the life that was there. Now with these new genetic techniques, we now know how abundant and how diverse this life is. I wrote a book about 15 years ago now called Tales from the Underground, Stories from Underneath Our Feet, which is all about some of this area of discovery. Also, we've learned a lot about how the crops we grow in rotation with our cash crops, the crops we might use in the fall and winter to cover the soil, play a very important role in promoting the good beneficial soil organisms in the soil. So how we manage soils and the crops we use play a very important role in building up healthy soils with lots of good guys in the soil, good beneficials in the soil. And I think before you heard from a colleague of mine, Joseph, who talked to you about cover crops, and I'll mention a little bit about them in relation to soil biology. So there's a couple other books here. This is another colleague of mine writing a book, really very much more about, my book is all about just the exciting, interesting things happening in soil biology. This book, Building Soils for Better Crops, is really a guide for farmers about how to improve their soil health. This is a book from Cornell on how we actually measure soil health at our laboratories. And then an interesting book that came out very recently by a colleague at the University of Washington, who really traveled the world and looked at how all across the globe, not only in the United States, but Europe and Africa, Asia, many farmers are rethinking about soils with all this new information in soil biology that's really causing a revolution in agriculture. So a lot of interesting things here. As I said, so much of this is relevant to farmers and also to the environment, thinking about erosion, water quality, food security, climate change. We now know that in just a handful of soil you might take from your farms or your gardens or from a forest soil, there are more living organisms in that handful of soil than there are humans on the entire planet. Just 20 years ago, we underestimated that by a great degree. And so many of these are good for us. Many of them we are still studying. We don't even know what they do. When I think of soil today, in the past, I think most farmers and I myself, when I was back in graduate school, often thought of the soil as, well, it's the place where our crops get their water and their nutrients. But now I view it really as a habitat, as a place where more than a third of all life on the planet lives. And it's mostly invisible, just like the oceans are a very important habitat, but it's mostly invisible to us unless we are scuba divers. So it's a very exciting habitat. And this, I'm not going to go through all the details of this slide, but just point out that This is all talking about in a cubic meter of soil, the huge numbers of bacteria we would see in the soil, 10 trillion, a huge number of bacteria, over 100 billion fungi. And this starts with some of the very smallest, very microscopic creatures. And then we get to some of the larger ones, some of them where you can actually see them. They're very small, but you can maybe even see them without a microscope, all the way up to earthworms and the bigger organisms. All of these are beneath our feet and play an important factor in growing our crops. 1 hectare of soil, if we were to weigh all of these organisms in 1 hectare of soil, it would be the equivalent of 15 tons of organisms in 1 hectare of soil. That's the equivalent to the weight of about 20 cows in 1 hectare of soil. So just to impress upon you how vast, how dramatic this is. And as I said, most of these organisms, we've really often focused only on a few that we consider parasites of crops, and not about all of these good guys that are so important to us. Of course, a large number of these organisms in the soil really play an essential role in the decomposition and formation of organic matter and the recycling of nutrients. So when we are finished with harvesting our crops and we have the rest of the crop, maybe the stems and the roots, so we leave those in the soil, or in a forest where the leaves fall, all of that decomposition that happens with those, all is due to a wide variety of organisms in this soil food web. And again, and this is not a slide I'm going to go through a lot of detail with, but you often start with things which might be like dead leaves, stems and stuff left over from the crops you've harvested. And they are first often attacked by bacteria and fungi, and then it goes up through the food chain to different organisms. Earthworms are kind of at the top of the food chain in the soil. And there's all of these, and also many of these are also affecting each other in various ways. So really fantastic thing, and we're learning so much more about this every day now. And very important for recycling nutrients, important to crops. This is just to illustrate that point about decomposition. This is a very simple little experiment. It can be done in a high school laboratory, really. This is soil that had been sterilized, and a bunch of leaves and such were put on top of the soil and left to sit for a period of time. This is the exact same soil, but which had not been sterilized, and where there are these abundant soil organisms. And you can see after, I forget exactly what the time frame was here, something like 30 days, you can see the decomposition. And a lot of what was up there, a lot of that now is in the soil as rich organic matter filled with nutrients, and more of it in a form that plants can take up. Plants, obviously, the plant roots cannot suck up nutrients directly from a leaf. It has to be first worked over by the soil organisms to make it available. There's a whole lot of the research today is really focusing on not just the soil in general, but really the very narrow zone of soil right around the roots. I'll be showing you in a moment slides about how important the roots are in their interactions with the soil microbial communities. And so in the very narrow zone of soil, I'm talking about just less than a centimeter around the roots of soils, that's where a lot of the action takes place. The plant roots are sending out signals to soil organisms, come here and help me. I can exchange some of my sugars that I produce with photosynthesis in exchange for what you can do for me. And there's a whole kind of crosstalk between the plant roots and the surrounding microbes. So it's a very important spot of plant-soil interactions involving the microbiology. And much of the research being done today is focused on that narrow zone of soil we call the rhizosphere, the root zone. Now, to age myself, as I said, when I went to college, we mostly looked at roots as taking up water and nutrients from the soil and sort of the end of the story. We now know that an equally important part of what roots do is, and this is true for all plants, is all plant roots actually release substances into the soil. Some of this may be simply excess sugars that they produce from photosynthesis go into the soil. And these sugars, as they're released, sometimes a significant fraction of the sugars that a plant produces end up leaking out through the roots. But this attracts beneficial bacteria to them, which can then access certain nutrients from the soil that the roots can't get at and can be beneficial. But they also exude substances that are really minute amounts, essentially, of herbicides, insecticides, things that can inhibit, stop the growth of weeds, insects, and disease. These are called allelochemicals. Anyway, they're types of chemicals that plants produce, exude to keep weeds and other pests away from them, can attract beneficial microbes, and also some of the substances the plant roots exude help dissolve plant nutrients into a form that the roots can take up. Also, the roots, as they push through the soil, just like earthworms, they create new pathways in the soil that allows oxygen to get down into the soil, which is good for roots. And also, this is getting some of the organic matter that plants produce deeper into the soil profile, which can be used then by the microbial community as a food source and is very good for plant production. So the roots are really another exciting area of research. You might think, today we know everything we need to know about roots, but it's actually a very, very exciting part of the research we do. And this is also very relevant to cover crops, as I'll mention, because the different cover crops you use in rotation can benefit the subsequent crop. For example, if you have a crop growing in the wintertime, a fall-winter cover crop, and then in the summer you plant a cash crop that you're trying to grow for money, some of the materials left by the roots might be beneficial to the next crop in terms of controlling weeds, etc. So this is helping us to learn about how to select rotation crops. Well, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about two of the most well-known and most important and most tightly linked connections between plants and microbes. And the first one that I think all of you are probably quite aware of when we think about legume plants, these plants that have that attract bacteria to their roots, nitrogen-fixing bacteria, we call them. And what these bacteria are able to do, these are usually rhizobium bacteria, one of the most common types. They might attach to the root of like a legume plant, like beans would be a good example. Soybeans is a good example of a legume crop. And these bacteria are able to capture nitrogen gas from the air spaces in the soil and convert it into a form that plants can take up and utilize. Plants, just like us, cannot utilize nitrogen gas. You know, the air we breathe every day, every breath we take, at least over 70% of that air is nitrogen gas, but it does us no good. We just breathe it all back out. We can't access it. But we need nitrogen, just like plants need nitrogen for our proteins, our nucleic acids, other aspects of for our life. And if it wasn't for these nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil and in the oceans, really there would be very little life on the planet. In exchange for these bacteria providing the plants with nitrogen from the soil, from the air spaces in the soil, the bacteria get in exchange sugars produced by the plants in their photosynthesis. So very important. And I'm going to talk a little more, a couple slides to follow on this one. The second one I'm going to talk about in the next couple slides will be mycorrhizal fungi. And this involves many, many species and also involves the large majority of plant species. So the nitrogen-fixing bacteria only have a relationship with a small group of plant species, such as the legume crops like soybeans. But mycorrhizal fungi are important for actually the majority of plants. And what these fungi do is they attach to the plant roots. They actually penetrate into the plant roots, but they aren't truly parasitic. They give the plant more than they get back, you might say. Basically, these fungi are able to explore small, tiny crevices that the roots cannot access. And they provide especially phosphorus, the nutrient phosphorus to plants. And in exchange, these fungi also get sugars from the plant via photosynthesis. So I got a couple of pictures about each of these now. So this on the upper left here is a microscopic picture of rhizobium bacteria, these nitrogen-fixing bacteria, attaching to a root hair, a tiny root of a soybean plant. And new discoveries have indicated that actually the plants call these rhizobium to them. They release a chemical called flavonoids And when the bacteria, these rhizobium bacteria, sense this sense this flavonoid material coming from the roots, they go to the roots. It says, come to me, I welcome you. The plant allows these rhizobium bacteria to penetrate into the roots. And when the bacteria enter the root, the bacteria actually affect the genetics of the plants. They turn on genes in the plant. And the plant then creates these little nodules that the root bacteria then live in. And this is where the exchange of sugars from the plant go to the bacteria, and where the bacteria are taking a nitrogen gas from the air spaces and turning it into ammonium, a form that the plant roots can take. Another very interesting recent discovery is that soybean plants and other plants can identify if some of these nodules on some of their roots are not performing, that those nodules are taking more of the sugars from the plant, but they're not providing much nitrogen. And the plant can actually stop sending sugars to those, cut them off to the non-producing nodules. So very interesting research there. So I think this, as I said, is something that you are all aware of in a practical sense. This is why we know that legume crops, many legume plants, need less nitrogen themselves because they have these bacteria on their roots that take nitrogen gas that's in the air spaces in the soil. And they make these plants, they supply much of the nitrogen needs of let's say the soybean plant. But then also these plants tend to be their tissues tend to be fairly nitrogen rich, full of nitrogen. So when we leave some of these plants, some of the material in the soil, the next crop that comes can benefit from the nitrogen that was in these soils. So they can supply nitrogen to the next crop, like here, a corn crop. During decomposition, of course, this decomposition process now involves other microbes that take the nitrogen that's in the leaves and convert it into a form that these plant roots can take up. The plant roots cannot take up a dead soybean plant. They need many microbes to help them break that down and convert that into nitrogen they can take up. Okay, this is going back to the mycorrhizal fungi now. And as I said, this is fascinating in that, again, when I was in college, more than 30 years ago now, we did not know that more than 90% of all plant species have a relationship with these kinds of fungi that grow on their roots. This is a root hair, and all these little hyphae, these little very thread-like materials are coming out from a fungus that's around that root. And these are able to penetrate into tiny spaces the roots can't reach and provide nutrients for them, particularly phosphorus. And in exchange, the fungi get some sugars from the plant. Another very interesting thing with this, a more recent discovery, is that the hyphae from one plant species can attach to a very different plant species. So mycorrhizal fungi growing on a bean plant, for example, can attach to the roots of a corn plant nearby, and some of the nitrogen from the legume plant can in real time pass through this network of fungal hyphae to the adjacent corn plant. So there's a whole network of communication between plants underground that is important. It's particularly important in forest ecosystems, but also going to be important in some forms of crop production. This is a picture of this is a root hair. So this is a root, but you can see the fungal hyphae coming out. There's some of these mycorrhizal fungi are attached to this root hair, and you can see how tiny the hyphae are, and how they are able to, obviously, they can get into little crevices to explore for nutrients that the plant roots cannot access. So this kind of just leads me into kind of pulling some of this together to talk about what we call a plant legacy effect. And by that, what I mean is how a plant that is growing in one time of the year, because of some of the interactions that plant species has with the soil microbial community, it can potentially benefit not only itself, but the subsequent crop to grow there. And a really good example of this is a crop called Sudan grass, which is very good for building up organic matter in soils. I'll talk about it a little bit later too. It has a lot of beneficial things to it. But for example, its roots, we now know, exude chemicals that suppress weeds, control weeds, and also control a particular type of parasitic pathogenic nematode. So although most nematodes in the soil are very beneficial for plants, there are some of them that will penetrate and parasitize plant roots. But these release a chemical that kills or suppresses those nematodes. These roots are also, it has very strong roots that can break through compacted layers of the soil. So farmers who have a problem with chronic continuing soil compaction sometimes use this crop in rotation, because instead of simply plowing and deep tilling the soil, this crop, the roots itself, can help break up the compacted layer. And of course, these roots also then get organic matter deeper into the soil. So that's one example of a beneficial plant, and a lot of it has to do with its interactions with microbes. This is just some data from a colleague of mine, a plant pathologist, and he was interested in, this is all a range of different crops we might grow in rotation with our cash crops. So these, some of these can be grown for cash, of course, but he's just looking at the effect of all of these crops on the number of the pathogenic nematode penetrons. You can see inside here, this is the root of a bean plant with this nematode, this little worm-like creature growing inside of it. And this is not a good thing. So this is one of the bad guys in the soil, a pathogenic nematode. And he was looking at the effect of these different crops and how it affected the number of these bad nematodes that affected and infected the bean plants that were grown. And you can see that crop I just talked about, Sudex, was the real winner here. Look at how it really reduced dramatically the number of nematodes infecting the subsequent bean crop that was grown after the Sudan crop. You can see here that hairy vetch, another type of winter cover crop we sometimes use here in the northeastern US, was not helpful at all. But it gets better and better with these different ones. So this is this is just one example of how we're evaluating what we're learning about these things in terms of thinking about crop rotations. So here's a close-up of this pathogenic nematode I just talked about. It feeds on the roots of plants, something we don't like, parasitic to plants. But almost all, this is such a tiny fraction of all the nematodes that are in soil. I don't know if you remember that early graphic I showed. I mean, there are thousands of nematodes in just a small handful of soil, and most of them are beneficial. For example, this strange looking creature here, this is just the mouth part of a really microscopic nematode that's a bacterial feeder. Looks like a little monster. But anyway, this is a beneficial nematode. This is not bad for our crop plants. This actually attacks bacteria that might be harmful to plants. So this is a very beneficial and part of this soil food web. This is a diagram just to show you the diversity of just this one group of soil organisms. We're just talking about nematodes, which are usually microscopic. Sometimes you can barely see them with the naked eye, but they're extremely tiny. Usually you would need a microscope to see them. But this is showing just the different mouth parts of the wide variety of species of nematodes you would find in a typical soil. This is the mouth part of that one that is parasitic to plants, and this stylet goes into the plant root, not a good thing. But all the rest of these are actually beneficial. So just to give you an example of the diversity. So we really want to promote the good guys and suppress the bad guys in the soil. This is something, this is getting back to that, the story of plant roots. As I mentioned with the Sudan grass, the Sudex, it had strong plant roots that were able to get through compacted soils and how that could benefit a subsequent crop. So these are some below ground photographs that a colleague of mine at University of Maryland took. He was growing a crop called canola to break up because it has strong roots to go through compacted layers. So he had an underground clear plastic tube where he could put a camera device into the soil. And here we can see that indeed the canola roots growing through the compacted soil of this field. And here he's got the camera in the same place. And you can see in the following summer, his cash crop, the crop he wants to grow for his yields and for profit, the soybean roots, are growing right through the same channel that was created by the previous canola root. So eventually these roots die and decompose. The subsequent cash crop is planted and can grow through and penetrate through the compacted layer. This is another crop crop we're looking at in rotation here in northeastern US called tillage radish. You can actually an edible crop, you can eat the radish. But we really like it because it can, as you can see, it's got very strong taproot that can break up shallow compacted layers. Another whole aspect that I haven't really talked about too much in my presentation so far is I've talked a lot about the soil food web, and then I've talked about those two important symbioses, mycorrhizal fungi, nitrogen fixing bacteria. But there's a whole other aspect of what's going on below ground that we're still learning much about, and I think will become more and more available to farmers to use some of this information. But really what it is that under the soil there, it's really it's a very rough life for all those organisms. A lot of the different organisms are attacking each other. It's like it's like a jungle out there, you might say. It's like, and you go to take a trip to Africa, and there's a whole, this organism's eating this organism. And so there are many organisms that are eating those organisms that are pathogenic, that we don't want for our crops. And that's what we want to do, is figure out how to promote those. So for example, there's a type of fungus called trichoderma, and it's almost found in all soils. It's very ubiquitous. I'm almost certain you have them in your soils in Armenia. They're very common and they are harmless to plants. There's another type of fungus, Pythium, which can cause attacks roots of plants and can be very bad for crop growth, for water uptake, etc. So this is a type of fungus we don't want. And this is showing one of these very tiny little hyphae of the Pythium fungus here, and then an even tinier hyphae of Trichoderma attacking the Pythium. So we now know that Trichoderma can help control this pathogenic type of fungus. And so we're learning more and more about how to create compost and such that might promote Trichoderma to control this particular type of root fungus problem. Here's an example of, this is another picture of a nematode, a microscopic picture of one of these very tiny nematodes that is pathogenic. It's that one that can penetrate plant roots. And here we see the hyphae of a fungus looping around and attaching to that nematode, and eventually it will literally suck the life out of the nematode. I'm not going to go through all of these photos, just to show you these are just other photos of various ways of various things we're learning about this idea of that a lot of the pests we think of in the soil, by them, whether they are bacterial pests, insect pests, fungal pests, they all have their, what we say, natural enemies in the soil that are there and will actually attack them. So we're learning a lot about all of these, and these are just examples of various crop pests being attacked by different types of organisms. So to summarize kind of where I'm at so far, and I want to kind of go into my final slides are going to be more about how do we promote this, how do we build our healthy soils? How can we build healthy soils to get the most out of what I have just been talking to you about? So if we have a really healthy soil, these are some ways we might define it. If we have a really healthy soil, typically it's going to be high in organic matter because that is the food for the soil food web that is good for promoting a lot of diverse and very active soil microbes that can be beneficial to us. And a healthy soil typically will have potential to suppress plant disease, insect and weed pests, the soil itself, before you apply any chemicals. It will have things like those nitrogen fixing bacteria, mycorrhizal fungi to form symbiotic relationships with our plants. A healthy soil will recycle essential plant nutrients rapidly, make it available to plants. And also all of these organisms, whether it's the bigger ones like earthworms or little tiny bacteria, they all release, when they die and decompose, they release a lot of sticky substances, sticky materials that help hold soil aggregates together, tiny little aggregates, small components of soil together. And this forms a really nice soil structure. It helps, so soil aggregation really helps create good porous soils that have better water infiltration. They're able to hold water better. And also after a flooding event, they drain better. So they're very important for that sort. And all of this, of course, can increase profits and protect the environment. Okay, so how do we get there? And one of the key things is we have now realized that most of our farms worldwide, we have not been paying enough attention to maintaining high organic matter in our soils, because we really need this. If you don't feed them, they're not there, the beneficials in the soil. So organic matter is the food for the many beneficial organisms in the soil. And so we have to think about rebuilding the organic matter in our soils. Fungal hyphae, as well as all of these sticky substances I mentioned released by soil microbes, are really important for good aggregates in the soil, which is important for soil structure, for good soil water holding capacity and drainage. This can then protect plants from short-term drought and flooding, compaction, and these things. Of course, also organic matter is a source of plant nutrients and also can capture and store carbon in the soil, so it's not in the air as the gas carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. And also a certain fraction of organic matter can help increase the nutrient holding capacity, the cation exchange capacity of soils, the ability of soils to hold nutrients. Organic matter helps to hold nutrients near the roots. So I mentioned that worldwide, we're really seeing that, and this is just some data from a study that was done looking at the US, the central US, and looking at gathering some data by using a model, really identifying
Dr. David, excuse me, by some mistake, we muted you. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Yeah. Did that just happen? I guess. Okay.
Yeah, it just happened.
Okay. Okay. So this is just a graph, just illustrates, it's based on a study that was done for the central United States, one of our most important farming regions, and documented that over the early part of the 20th century, we lost a lot of the carbon in our soils. The organic matter went down and down and down. And a lot of this was doing too much plowing and tilling, as I'll talk about in a moment, that tends to speed up organic matter decomposition too quickly, and it's released before the plants can use it, and you lose your carbon. Also, we started using more and more chemicals for fertilizing our plants, more and more chemicals for controlling diseases, and we got away from using rotation crops. And so this ended up providing less organic matter from those plants we used to use in rotation. That organic matter was no longer going into the soil. So we've seen this huge degradation of our carbon in our soils. And what's part of the soil health revolution today is how do we get back up there? How do we rebuild our soils back where we were, which will create a more beneficial system for our plants. So I mentioned excessive amount of plowing and tillage we end up losing much of our organic matter much too quickly. And often this starts with the problem with compaction. Soils are compacted and a farmer thinks, well, I need to plow to get rid of that compaction. But it creates kind of a vicious circle where we start with compaction, we increase tillage, but this ends up pumping so much oxygen into the soil that it accelerates dramatically the rate of decomposition by the soil microbial community of the organic matter. And a large amount of the organic matter and the carbon is lost very quickly and goes up into the air as CO2. And then it's not there for the long-term benefit of our crops. Also, when we do this, as the organic matter begins to go down, there's less food for the microbial community. This reduces soil aggregation, and our soils become drain more poorly, etc. We have poorer draining soils, which are more prone to compaction, and round we go. So we have to try to break this cycle. Sometimes we do have to do some deep tillage, but it can be done in combination with using crops, for example, that can help penetrate compacted layers and also add organic matter to soils instead of just tilling, plowing. So I have just really a few slides left, and they really primarily are going to be emphasizing these 3 points. So how do we get back to soils that are healthier and are going to be, promote the beneficials in soils, the beneficial organisms, and then help us suppress the bad guys? And there, in the long term, there may be some very sophisticated, very strategic techniques to use, but in general, it comes down to these 3 major tactics. One is reducing the amount of plowing and tilling. This is showing one way of reducing tillage where the farmer is using what's called strip till in English. And it's really what it means is instead of plowing up all of the soil on the farm, they're only plowing up and doing a very shallow amount of plowing right in the zone where they're going to plant their seeds. So that allows all of this soil to stay healthier and maintain its high organic matter. So it's reducing the amount of tillage, but still allowing some for planting seeds. The other thing is trying to maintain plants, living plants on the field as much of the year as possible. If you think about it, it's obvious the more of the year you have plants growing in the soil, even after your cash crop is harvested in the fall, planting new plants in the fall and winter, they will continue their photosynthesis, taking carbon dioxide from the air, turning it into plant biomass. And this eventually, much of it will end up as organic matter in the soil. So maximizing the length of time we have vegetation cover and cover crops, which Joseph talked to you about before. And then you can actually directly add organic matter to soil, compost and mulches, using manures. Biochar is a new kind of way of adding directly a very stable form of carbon to soil. So actually directly adding organic matter. This is I'm just kind of reiterating again the 3 main points of rebuilding organic matter in soil with just a little more detail. So reducing soil disturbance, plowing and tilling the soil, disturbing the soil. This pumps too much oxygen into the soil. The English phrase we use is that it fans the flames of organic matter decomposition. It rapidly causes very rapid decomposition, too rapid. And then the more we can integrate more perennial, not just annual crops, but crops that stay in the ground year round into our systems or rotate with long-term species such as alfalfa. This also reduces the amount of plowing and tilling we do. So that's one approach. Second one is fall, winter cover crops and innovative crop rotations. So as I already said, this allows for maintaining carbon capture by photosynthesis, which ends up as organic matter in the soil eventually, more of the year. And also, we can also have more nitrogen fixation if some of these are legume crops. It helps to maintain, having biodiversity of crops that we grow above ground also creates a diverse community of organisms below ground. And it also protects the soil surface. For example, growing cover crops, Joseph may have already mentioned this to you, but if you have heavy rainfall events sometimes during the fall or whatever, if you have fall, winter cover crops there, your soil will be less likely to erode because the crops and the roots will help hold the soil in place. So another very important strategy for maintaining our soil resources. And then actually directly adding organic matter. This is I gave you kind of a long list before of several things of what we look for in a healthy soil. But if we want like one sentence that describes soil health, this is something that many organizations have worked with in the US to kind of come up with one sentence to try to describe what is a healthy soil. And it's the long-term capacity or ability of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. As simple as that. This stuff I've talked about with regarding building up organic matter in soils. I already mentioned, of course, that also organic matter is also mostly carbon. So it also plays a role not only in helping us produce better crops, but also in climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So by promoting diverse beneficial microbial community, it ends up being very low cost resilience to drought and flooding, because if you have a good microbial community, you end up with better soil aggregation, and the soil is less prone to drought and flooding. It also reduces the carbon footprint of agriculture in terms of agriculture's contribution to greenhouse gases. It's good for agriculture because this organic matter is mostly carbon. So again, building soil organic matter by the techniques, 3 techniques I mentioned: reducing tillage, winter cover crops, using manures, composts as much as possible. It helps us in adapting to climate change. It helps farmers cope with the problem of maybe more frequent droughts, more frequent flooding than they've seen before. And it also is part of slowing the pace of climate change, mitigation, because that organic matter is mostly carbon that now is in the soil instead of the air as CO2. And in the US, there are various governments that are thinking about providing farmers incentives to use some of these soil health practices, as much for their climate change mitigation potential as for helping the farmers with their own business objectives of resilience to drought and flooding, etc. So there's a lot of both environmental groups and policymakers who do not really focus that much on agriculture are very excited about what farmers can do to store carbon in the soil. And that's really my last slide. This is just, I think you'll have a recording of this and you'll have a copy of my slides. These are just a variety of references, some of those books I mentioned at the beginning and a couple of others. But that's really my final slide. And I think I'll stop there. And we started a little late, but I guess I'm on time, but we're a little late, but we have some time for questions, I'm sure. So I will stop sharing and take some time for questions if we have some.
Thank you very much, Dr. David. This is really very interesting and very detailed presentation, which I have seen and heard from you. Very, very useful, and there is clear connection of improving the soil biodiversity and its connection to climate change, and how we should work and improve that situation. Really, thank you very much for this good presentation. I hope that our participants will have some questions to you, and I am giving the floor to our participants for directing questions to you.
While we are waiting for questions, I could add a couple of comments. Should I do that? So, in general, what the goal of this presentation, I think, was about is really trying to open your minds to thinking about the soil, as I said, as a habitat for so much life that's down there, and that almost all of it is going to be good for our crops if we promote them, if we build a soil that supports them. And so it's a different way of thinking when a farmer is driving a tractor. I think 20 years ago, farmers would often be focused on one or two organisms in the soil that they know could cause problems for their crop roots or be bad for the crops. But really now I think the thinking has to be, there are many allies there, many friends of the farmer. And how do we work with nature rather than simply always battling against it? And so this is a way of learning to work. So it's kind of a new thinking about, when I talk about a revolution, it's really that complete change of mindset. The other thing about this work is that just bringing you up to speed on what's happening, and also to kind of keep you open to a lot of new things will be coming out you need to be aware of, having it on your radar, as we say, that we're learning much more about specific cover crops and what they can do for specific types of problems you might be having with your field. And all of this isn't available today, but we're learning much more in terms of our fall, winter cover crop recommendations, for example, than we knew before. Before we always, of course, we always have known for many years now, decades, that growing legume crops in rotation provides nitrogen. But we're just learning so much more new stuff. So there's gonna be a lot of new things out there, and keep it in mind and be watching for that.
Կարելի է ես ավելացնեմ, շնորհակալություն հայտնեմ ձեզ, պարոն Wolf, Dr. Wolf, արտակին
Նարինե ջան, ներողություն, ես ես չեմ լսում։
հիմա չեք
Նարինե,
լսում,
լսում եք մեզ։
հա, այ, հիմա լսում եք, հիմա լսում եք,
Նարինե ջան, քեզ լսում են, դու խոսա։
հիմա լսում
Yes,
եք,
I can. Yeah, I can hear you, Sushank.
Ես ուզում էի ինձ իրավունք վերապահել բոլոր մասնակիցների անունից շնորհակալություն հայտնել, շատ ինֆորմատիվ, մանրամասն ու շատ հարուստ բովանդակությամբ պրեզենտացիայի համար։ Իրականում ինձ թվում է մենք հարցեր չունենք, որովհետև ժամանակ է պետք, որ այդ ամեն ինչը մեր մեջ ավելի վերլուծենք ու մարսենք ու հասկանանք, որովհետև ձեր ամբողջ պրեզենտացիայի մեջ ինձ հատկապես այս պահին հատկապես ինչը տպավորվեց, բացի ամբողջ նյութը, որ իսկապես մենք պետք է արժևորենք հողի առողջությունը, որովհետև մենք բոլորս հողից ստանում ենք մեր կենսական անհրաժեշտություն ունեցող մթերքները, ու այդ հողի առողջությունը բացի էկոլոգիական նշանակությունից անմիջականորեն կարևոր է մեզանից յուրաքանչյուրի առողջ կենսակերպի համար։
Yeah. Yes.
Shushan Jan, I have a question from Dr. Alison Chatterchan, who was not able to ask her the question directly to participants. I sent that question to you by chat, but I can read out that. The question is, okay, I will read out loud from Dr. Alison Chatterchan, who is also the Cornell lecturer, and she is teaching climate change and policy matter in Cornell University. So the question is following: is there any soil health lab or program similar to the Cornell Soil Health Lab in Armenia? How can farmers do a comprehensive soil test in Armenia? If anyone from the participants can answer, that would be good. Otherwise, I can answer to this question.
Միգուցե հողագիտության ինստիտուտում են անում Արտակ։
I could just add that the soil health testing lab at Cornell is, really only developed over the last 15, 20 years or so. And we really realized that in the past, when we talked about testing the soils with farmers, we focused just on the chemistry, the pH, the acidity, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, these kinds of things. And our new soil health test has provided us with some way of providing farmers with more information about the biology, and also, as I mentioned, the soil aggregation, the soil structure, that are important to these other features. But it took some years to do that. And I'm sure in Armenia, excuse me, my coughing. I'm sure there are some scientists who are looking at some of the details of soil biology that I was talking about today. But one challenge we had with our soil health test in the US was coming up with an inexpensive way to provide really practical information for the farmers. So for example, for us to tell the farmers, oh, you have, these many millions of bacteria in your soil, that doesn't give them any useful information. So we've had to focus on, particular measures that are inexpensive, so it's not too expensive of a test, and also provide some very practical information. So that's the real challenge of getting that discovery science into a form that's practical. And but we, for example, we at Cornell could work with some of your scientists there, and they could look at what we've done as sort of a template, an example, and modify it for the needs in Armenia. Be happy to work with you.
This is really very good idea to cooperate with scientists from Armenia. And actually, I'm personally working on this issue of connecting Cornell scientists with Armenian scientists. This work on the way. So if there is no one to answer to the question of Dr. Alison Chatrachan, I would like just to add that we have Soil Research Institute in Armenia who is responsible for this kind of work. I personally have never had chance to have soil test with this research institute, but I am sure they have comprehensive work experience of doing that. It's just a matter, as David Wolf said, is to do a research or test of specific items or any components of the soil. Besides that, I know that there are commercial organizations and laboratories who can have tests of different components of the soil, nutrients like nitrogen or micronutrients of the soil. So there are opportunities of having soil test in Armenia. We have a raised hand from Ala Alexanyan. Let's give her a floor to ask questions. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Can I add something? Yeah, first of all, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Just I wanted to add that analysis related to the soil health, like soil biodiversity and stuff like this, it's not very popular in Armenia, and maybe you can find one or two work, like scientific work, jointly with the international colleagues done in any other laboratories, I don't know, in European or US lab, but not in Armenia. Unfortunately, we don't have this kind of lab, and we don't have this kind of experience of analysis in Armenia related to the other kind of analysis, soil analysis. I know that in Yerevan State University also they have a lab, a very active lab doing different kind of soil analysis, and they are quite successful also in science, but it's only physical, mechanical, or chemical analysis of the soil. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alla. Very good notice and very good information. Do we have more questions?
I did see that Allison had put in the chat a link to our soil health test manual. And so that has a very good background, a little bit about soil health, like I talked about, but then goes into some detail about the actual measurements we use and how we've developed these simple, fairly simple documents that we return to the farmer that give them a score for different aspects of soil biology, soil chemistry, and soil physical characteristics.
Thank you very much for Allison for sharing this information. Just to add to what Alla Alexanian just said about the situation in Armenia, I agree with her that doing soil health test, I mean, in Armenia is not that popular because of different factors. It could be economical, it could be subjective or objective reasons, but mostly, to my understanding, people at this moment are not realizing the seriousness of this issue, or maybe they are realizing this seriousness, but not in that level that there is need to put too much attention to this issue. To my experience of working with farmers and in this sphere, we are using our land very extensively without paying attention to its nutrient content. Mostly our practices of using the land is conventional, heavy plowing mostly. And that's why this series of webinars originated in my idea of having these webinars of using cover crops, and then about this microbiology originated during my study at Cornell. And I wanted to share this information with my colleagues in Armenia and raise this topic to their attention, to bring this topic to their attention, and ask them to pay more attention to this issue.
Not a question, but an addition. My name is Luisa, and I would like to speak for the Armenian farmers and to the unpopularness of the soil analysis, which was mentioned. I don't agree, because mostly in Armenia, the farms are small farms, and farmers are have very small land plots, and it's not applicable to use soil analysis. Yes, the soil is used very extensively here, but farmer is not even able to, it's not applicable to do the soil analysis every time for this small land plot. So I think that in case of big farms, it is normal and applicable, but not in case of small farms that are present in Armenia. Thank you. And also I would like to ask one question. What books, or I don't know, methodologies would you recommend to use for farmers, not like just very scientific, but popular ones, if there are any. And I would like also to thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. And I think farmers and all the people that are involved in this field will take a lot of information, interesting information, and apply it later on. Thank you very much.
Dr. David, you are muted. Can you unmute and start again?
Sorry, yes. So I think of the references I indicated on my last slide, and also it was included in one of my early slides showing where I showed the cover of a few different books. The one by my colleague, Better Soils for Better Crops. That's probably the best one. It's a very practical guide for farmers on developing a soil management, crop management system that tends to take advantage of some of the things I talked about. And so even separate from doing soil health testing, simply following some of those guidelines in that book is a good way to probably advance, taking advantage of what we've learned and doing more to stimulate beneficial soil microbial activity in your soils.
Thank you very much for the answer. And I would like to thank Louisa Gevorkian for very good comment and very good question. This is really very good to have such farmers who are willing to learn more and know more about this topic. I just would like to add to the comment of Louisa. To my understanding, you are right. If the plot is small, people may think that they don't need to do much, let's say, tests, etc. You are totally right. My point of or point of other presenters that it is not popular in Armenia refers to the fact that it doesn't matter how much land we are using. We need to put much attention of how we are using that and how long we will have those nutrients or fertility of the land. That's why those two webinars which we conducted want to make people to understand the importance of this issue and pay attention to that and improve their farming practices.
I could just add one more thing on the soil health testing. We, it's not, it's really looking at, the soil health test provides information on whether or not you are attaining some of the long-term goals of building a healthier soil. And so it's not the kind of test that you would use simply like some chemical soil tests are strictly to let you know exactly how much fertilizer you might need to apply. The soil health test is a little more expensive typically, but we try to keep it as low cost as possible. But it's not something you have to do every year. It would be to take some measurements now and say, I'm going to start changing some of the way I grow my crops and the crops I'm growing, change some of my practices. And 2 or 3 years from now, I can use the test again to see if I'm making progress. So.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for this good addition, Dr. David. Do we have more questions from participants? You mean the comment of David, Dr. David? Okay, please, yes, please translate, sure. Okay, Shushanjan, thank you very much for translating the comment. Do we have more questions from participants?
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure, please go ahead, Sarkis.
Yes. Hello, everyone, again. And Mr. David, let me thank you for the interesting presentation. So as Artak said, you know, the cultivation culture in our country is the culture is doing very heavy ploughing. Usually this is doing ploughing once or twice during a year. And we need some, you know, some practical tools to offer our farmers to start keeping the fertility of the soil. So my question is, what would be your suggestion how to keep this balance about keeping these soil organisms, as you mentioned, our friends in soil, and not to damage our friends, and also to struggle against the enemies in soil?
Yes, so, well, it does come back to, in a general sense, to those three topics I mentioned: reducing the amount of plowing and tillage. And for there, sometimes can be an expense involved depending on the type of farm operation you have. But for example, there might be different types of plow tillage equipment you would need to buy. I gave one example of a strip tillage where you only plow a narrow strip of the soil instead of churning it all up dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example. And then a lot of farmers are now, instead of, after their fall winter cover crop dies and they're ready to put in their spring planting of a cash crop, they don't churn it all into the soil, all that fall winter crop residue. Instead, they simply roll it and then they plant into all that residue. It seems almost impossible, but there are these new no-till planters, they're called. It's a new type of planting device that helps you get plants established into that residue. So there's, you know, it gets into the details of some of these techniques. And again, that book, Building Soils for Better Crops, provides a lot of information about those techniques, as well as the document that Allison put in the chat provides some information about those techniques.
Okay, thank you very much. But given the tools we have in our villages that farmers use now, so what does it mean to reduce, let's say, the ploughing or cultivation? Yes, let's say they are doing ploughing twice in a year, so they have to do no ploughing, or they have to do just once in a year. So what can be the I mean, when we can suggest to our farmers, which would be not so costly and they can accept it easily, you know, because we are changing culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, it usually takes 2 or 3 years of some transition to go to a reduced tillage system. You can't simply do this in 1 year and say, I'm no longer going to plow at all. You have to kind of gradually reduce tillage. I do think farmers, when they're sitting on a tractor and plowing, they have to ask themselves, you know, why exactly am I doing this? Is it absolutely essential? Sometimes, for example, at least in the US, we have farmers who are, if they see a couple little weeds pop up in the field, they're out there using the plow tillage equipment to get rid of every weed. They want it to look perfect. Actually, a weed, as long as it does not go to seed, if it's cut back soon enough, can be beneficial for the soil. So also farmers, when they put down a crop and there's a lot of the residue from a cash crop or from a fall winter crop on the field, and they see this debris, they don't like the way that looks. And they're plowing just to bury it in the soil so they don't have to look at it. when I see a field that is perfectly nothing but soil, no crop residue showing, I wonder, I think they're probably overdoing it with the tillage.
Okay, so usually the cultivation or ploughing is done for, let's say, for weed control, for soil permeability.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for example, farmers are
things like that.
use a lot of cover crops to help smother weeds. There's some techniques for using fall, winter cover crops that help smother weed growth in the early spring, and some techniques like that is one sort of approach. But there's a lot, and it really depends, of course, on the particular crop you're growing, and it's very complicated.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Okay, thank
David. I briefly will describe to Sarkis about this situation that he is describing. By the way, for dear participants, if we have no more questions, I would like to say thanks to Dr. David for his excellent, fantastic presentation about this topic. And thank you for supporting this webinar series and agreeing to devote your time and present this very important topic to our audience. And I wish we can establish very good, productive cooperation of Cornell scientists with Armenian scientists. And we have a lot of things to exchange from our side to your colleagues and from your side to our colleagues. I find this cooperation beneficial and mutually beneficial. Sure. And from my side, I will do everything to establish this connection. Thank you very much, Dr.
That's
David.
great. Thank you. Thanks to your team for doing all the translation, and thanks to the participants. And nice getting to know you, Artak. And yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know that you have another meeting, and
I do have another meeting at 10. Yeah, soon.
Yeah, you can leave, and we will close the meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And good luck with your work there, and soils and everything related to agriculture. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Have a nice day.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Wolf.
As far as we have still English-speaking participants, Dr. Alison Chatterjee is still with us. Sarkis Jan, I will answer to your question in English. Referring to your question about the soil cultivation technology, I would say that our previous webinar about cover crop application was showing, the presenter was showing the examples where by using the mixture of cover crops will help to control and suppress the weeds in the field. So which means that when you grow the specific cover crops and let's say in quotation marks kill them, and after that you plant your cash crops, it helps you to cover crops suppress the weeds, and it helps to grow the subsequent culture. And let's say wheat or corn in the USA, they grow also soybeans, and by that way you are avoiding the soil plowing needs. This is the experience that US farmers are doing now.
Okay, thank you, Artak Can. By the way, do we have any handbook? You said about crop crops, but this requires some knowledge and maybe some extra resources for the farmers to apply all these technologies. Yes. Do we have any handbook prepared and delivered for the farmers so far? Do you know about this? Any information about this?
In Armenian, I really don't know is there any such a book or not, but during our last webinar, the presenter provided some reference materials, references for reading, which is in English. And I highly recommend you to watch our previous webinar, and you will learn about this topic matter topic a little bit more, and you will find the reference information over there. If not, I can send you my email right now by chat, and you can write me email. Whatever information I found so far, I can share with you, and we can discuss this topic to learn in details what exactly you need to know. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Can I make an addition, please?
Sure, yes.
First of all, let me thank you for the comments to my question and my comment. And second, I would like to say that if we want to make the soil health testing popular, first of all, we're changing the culture, as one of the participants mentioned, and this culture needs to be, this beneficial culture needs to be demonstrated. That means that, for example, we can make some demonstrative farms where people can see and replicate this behavior. And second of all, relating to the soil testing, I think that one institute and even some resources that are available maybe in the Agrarian University or elsewhere is very little. For example, we can think of mini labs, like movable mini labs to be installed or brought to Armenia for soil testing if we want it to be cheaper and more available for the farmers, so that the farmers will not go from, for example, from Armavir to Yerevan to make the soil testing, which will be not very applicable for the farmers. I think there can be some strategies developed that can be applicable for the farmers, and so the farming and agriculture will become more efficient. Thank you.
Dear Luisa Gevorkian, I am amazed. Thank you very much for your valuable comments and your valuable input to this webinar. You are absolutely right. We need to have demonstration plots in order to change the culture. I'm also agree with you 100%, and my colleagues also participating on this webinar can agree. By the way, I would like to mention that this webinar is going on within the framework of a small grant which was provided by Humphrey program to me. I'm one of the winners out of 500 participants. 14 participants were awarded this grant. So this small grant allows me to establish a small plot in Arad Valley, where I cooperate with a group of farmers, where we establish small plot where we are going to apply cover crops, which are available in Armenia legally. I mean, when I say allowed, legally allowed to sell the registered seeds, a mixture of seeds from Barenbrook company. So in this plot, we are applying a mixture of 5 perennial crops. And the next step when this field will be established will be the using the practice of integrating animals to this plot for grazing, for applying rotational grazing. As you know, the pasture issue in Arad Valley is very strict, and there are not that many pastures. So we are going to have rotational grazing in that plot. And this plot is going to be a demonstration place for that area. And in my plans is to organize demonstration field days for showing this practice to farmers. If anyone from you will be interested, I will be glad to invite you to these demonstration days. And if everything will be okay, we will have also recordings of those demonstration days, and it will be available in the web. I'm also going to create a Facebook page, Soil Health Information Corner, where I'm going to share all information that we have gained during this program, and all these efforts are going to give us a chance to have this information flow or practice to be more sustainable and available to our farmers. More information will be coming. Please, I will share this Facebook page with participants and my colleagues from iCare and Vista organization, and ask them to share that information to their beneficiary farmers. And let's stay tuned and grow for sustainable agriculture.
Thank you. Please list me in your list of participants in the demonstration days. Thank you.
Okay, sure. You can consider yourself already registered, Luis.
Me too. I'd be glad if you can host me there.
Okay, sure.
Me too.
Okay,
Artakcan,
you.
yes. Is it applicable for the orchards and vineyards or not?
Okay, just a few words about when your question probably refers to cover crop. Yes,
cover crop. Yes, exactly.
Exactly, it is applicable to any plot. It's just a matter of good management. We should be careful here. I had this question also from the last webinar from the farmer who were asking, but it is not applicable in the orchard, etc. But it is applicable to the orchard. The mixture of cover crops you can apply in orchards as well. It's just a matter of better strict management of that cover crop. What I mean by strict management, you need to keep a specific height of the cover crop in order not to damage your trees. What I mean by damaging your trees is, as you know, the orchards have a lot of different kind of diseases, fungi diseases. So if you keep the height of the cover crop in a specific, let's say, amount, then you are going to avoid these fungi diseases. When the cover crop, inter-row cover crops will be established very well, they will also help, as the Dr. David mentioned in his presentation, they will help to avoid different kind of diseases and control this process of having fungi diseases. There are a lot of research work which is available in different university websites in US. Fortunately, at this moment, I don't have any reference links to bring it to your attention, but there are. It is also possible to apply cover crop in orchards. I hope I answered to your question.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? I would like to ask participants. My colleague Lilith Avdalian placed a questionnaire about this webinar in the chat box. I would like to ask participants to enter to that questionnaire and answer few questions which will help us to better evaluate this effectiveness of this webinar. And I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and for me it was also very useful and a lot of new information, and I hope this practice will go on in Armenia, and we will be able to use cover crops and other sustainable agriculture practices, which will better or improve our agricultural practices. Thank you for your participation. I would like, we will stay online for the next 10 minutes, then then we will switch off, end the meeting. Please feel free to send any question by chat or raise your hands. Thank you.
Նախքան սպասում ենք հաջորդ հարցին, կուզենամ եւս մեկ անգամ ձեր ուշադրությունը դարձնել հարցաշարին, որը ուղղված է կազմակերպիչներին օգնել հասկանալ, թե ինչքանով ենք ճիշտ կազմակերպել հանդիպումը եւ ընդհանրապես ինչ հասկացանք այսօրվա հանդիպումից։ Շատ օգնած կլինեք, եթե վերջին հղումով, որ տեղադրվեց չաթով, մտնեք եւ լրացնեք։ Եթե դուք չեք հասցրել մասնակիցների թերթիկը լրացնել, խնդրում եմ նաև թերթիկը լրացեք, որովհետև պատասխաննամակ պետք է ուղարկենք եւ ուղարկենք ձեզ պրեզենտացիան այսօրվա, տեսաձայնագրության հղումը եւ այլ նյութեր։ Մենք նախքան սպասում ենք երևի թե վերջին հարցին, օգտվելով արդից ուզում եմ շնորհակալություն հայտնել բոլոր մասնակիցներին, ովքեր ժամանակ տրամադրեցին եւ մասնակցեցին այսօրվա վեբինարին, հուսով ենք, որ արդյունավետ էր եւ կարողացանք մի փոքր ավելի ընդլայնել այսօրվա վեբինարի միջոցով մեր գիտելիքները։ Շնորհակալություն ենք հայտնում Կորնելի համալսարանին իրենց աջակցության համար, որովհետև այնտեղից մենք արդեն երկրորդ վեբինարն ենք ունենում։ Շնորհակալություն Արտակ ջան, որ համագործակցության համար, քանի որ ձեզ հետ համագործակցության շնորհիվ է, որ կարողացել ենք այս վեբինարը կազմակերպել։ Հիշեցնեմ, որ վեբինարը կազմակերպվել է Humphrey Fellowship ծրագրի, ICARE հիմնադրամի եւ Vista փորձագիտական խմբի համագործակցության շնորհիվ, ICARE հիմնադրամի կողմից համագործակցությունը իրականացվում է Ագրին նախագծի շրջանակում, Ագրին նախագիծը իրականացվում է Սևծովյան ավազանի ծրագրի շրջանակներում։ Եթե մենք չունենք որևէ հարց, կարող ենք այսօր ամփոփել հանդիպումը։ Ունենք հարց։ Կարող եք լրացնել որևէ բան, կարող եք պարզապես, եթե ունեք ինչ-որ բան ասելու, խոսել։ Այլապես արդեն ամփոփում ենք։
Lily Jan, I just want to add a few words about and say thank you to Dr. Alison Chatterchan for her generous help and devoutness to this effort and helping us to organize this webinar and also to establish this connection with the presenters. Actually, Dr. Alison Chatterchan helped me a lot during my study at Cornell and introduced me to these wonderful professors and lecturers, and I was able to establish this connection with them. And I hope the cooperation with Dr. Alison Chatterchan will last very long, and Armenian scientific society and farmers will benefit a lot. I personally worked with Alison Chatterchan by doing research work on climate change in Armenia in January 2020, and a lot of travel around the Armenia. And I should say that Dr. Chatterchan loves Armenia very much. So thank you very much, Alison.
You're welcome. Welcome.
Ուզում եմ տեղեկացնել, որ հանդիպումը, ինչպես նկատել եք, տեսաձայնագրվում է եւ դասախոսի եւ մասնակիցների թույլտվությամբ մենք տեսաձայնագրությունը տեղադրելու ենք iCare-Agree-ին YouTube-յան էջում եւ հղումը անպայման կուղարկենք մասնակիցներին պատասխան նամակով։ Իսկ այս պահին կարծում եմ, որ երևի թե ամփոփենք Արտակ ջան, ինչ կարծիք եք։
I agree, and I think there are no other questions. Thank you for participants for devoting their time and participating. Thank you very much.
Մենք 5 րոպեվա չափով կթողնենք ակտիվ հղումը, որպեսզի մասնակիցները կարողանան չաթից վերցնել հարցաշարի հղումը։ Ընկերներ ջան, խնդրում ենք մասնակցեք հարցաշարի լրացմանը, որովհետև դա մեզ օգնելու է, որ հարցերի պատասխան ստանանք։ Իսկ այս պահին հանդիպումը համարում ենք ավարտած։ Շնորհակալ ենք բոլոր մասնակիցներին, իրենց ներդրման համար, մասնակցության համար եւ հուսով ենք, որ այսօրվա հանդիպումը իրոք արդյունավետ էր։ Լավ եղեք։ Bye bye.
Lily Jan, just technical question. Shall we stop the recording?
Կարծում եմ այո Արտակ ջան, որովհետև բովանդակային որևէ ներդրում այլևս չի լինելու։ Շատ լավ։
Okay.